how can men actually nuts and bolts day to day, like start to feel those things, start to be comfortable with these feelings coming up in the moment, when for 30, 40, 50 years, some of these guys, we have men's group for 70 years, they've been told and ridiculed around feeling these uncomfortable feelings.
Yeah. So this is where things get hopeful and exciting, because the brain, we know through research in neuroplasticity, is indefatigably plastic. That's to say, it never stops changing at any age. So it doesn't matter how old you are, how many times you've repeated the same patterns. Your brain is no less equipped to change now than it was when you were a child. Ultimately, we know that perhaps it's a little bit more plastic when it comes to learning languages and certain skills when you're a kid, but ultimately change is our nature. It's happening all the time. And we can actually, when we tune into it, we can actively direct where that change goes. So in terms of, nuts and bolts, it really comes down to a few key concepts that people need to understand and then practice with repetition to A, get in touch with those feelings, and then B, start to transmute their pattern in a way that works to their advantage. Getting those, I think it was Bruce Springsteen who said about going on stage, it's not about getting the butterflies to, be removed. It's not about getting rid of the butterflies. It's getting them to fly in formation. So when
great.
It comes to, even feeling negative emotions or what we would call negative emotions, it's not necessarily, at least at first, it's not about getting rid of them. That shouldn't be the goal. The goal should be to reframe them. And there's something we'll get into called cognitive reappraisal that we could use to kind of reclassify them so that it changes our physiology to them and allows us to move forward in the face of them. And when you do that, again, somewhat paradoxically and very Buddhistly, they start to change. So it's like, the Buddhist approach is, the saying is, the rock is only heavy when you push against it. And by not pushing against it, it actually ultimately ceases to exist. So, if you want, we can get into some of the nuts and bolts of how I would, break down a practice, what that looks like. But yeah, what would you like to know?
It's like boots on the ground. If I'm a guy and I'm going through a divorce and I'm feeling, I'm feeling uncomfortable with some of the things I have to be going through, courts, moving up on myself or whatever, of course those feelings should be there. And it's in the moment, how do you stop the ruminations from getting away from you? How do you stop those, stressing about those feelings?
Yeah. So I think you already kind of raised an important point, which is feelings that are generated from real world events, right? Divorce, stress at work, grief, loved one passing away. These are things that, again, the idea is not to compartmentalize or banish or condemn them. It's not even necessarily to desensitize ourselves from them. The idea is to be able to use this information, but to be able to stay in contact and move forward and do the things that we need to do, whether it's comfort ourselves, take care of ourselves or others, or, move forward with paperwork or legal processes or actually get things done. We need to be present for these. So the basic tenet when it comes to behavioral psychology is what they call behavioral avoidance and behavioral contact or going towards something. So at any given time, we're always either withdrawing from something or we're moving toward it. And ultimately, we want to be able to stay in contact in any scenario, which is just to say that we want to be able to be comfortable with whatever arises. So how would this look when it comes to dealing with uncomfortable emotions or things that are inherently create agitation? So the first step is really simply about awareness, of course. It's just being present and feeling what you feel. And even feeling them as sensations in your body, removing the label or the story that comes up oh, this emotion is coming up because this reminds me of the time when my dad did this and this. It's okay, just pause the story for a moment and just feel the sensations, right? It's because again, if you could feel these palpitations and you could make up a story that, oh, I'm nervous because I'm on this podcast or I don't know who I'm talking to or all these things. Or you could realize I just drank 2 cups of coffee and that's why my heart's racing. So similarly, let's take a pause and realize that these are sensations in the body. They're just there. They're not good. They're not bad. They're sensations in the body. And then start to separate yourself a little bit from the sensations. Just see them kind of for what they are. One way that's great to do that is through something like visualization or engaging your other senses. So one practical way to do this would be, let's say, you can actually put those feelings or sensations, or even the story, if it comes up, on something like a movie screen in your mind. And you could move that screen further and further back. And then you could redirect your focus to where you are right here and right now. So sitting in this chair, being present, you can feel the things in your body that actually feel comfortable and relaxed, and you can help your body to relax. So by doing this, you're already starting to create a new neurological association between that thought, that feeling, or that thing that's causing agitation. And you're now kind of rewiring that with the ability to keep your body calm despite having that memory, that thought, or that feeling, right? So now you're already kind of freeing yourself from it. Now, the next step would be to start to replace that story or that narrative with one that works to your advantage. And this can be as simple as reframing the threat or this thing that's happening, to me, that I have to deal with, as a challenge, that this is going to be something that may not be comfortable, but it's ultimately going to help me grow. And so it's kind of like the classic fix versus the growth mindset, focusing on the process versus the outcome, and saying that, if the goal of life is actually to grow, to stretch, and to expand, then this challenge is perfect, right? If the goal of life is to be comfortable all the time, not be challenged at all, then of course, kind of like I'm in for a world of hurt because I'm just focusing on the obstacles. But the neuroscience is actually pretty exciting. What's coming out is that simply by changing that narrative, by doing this cognitive reappraisal and simply saying, okay, this is a challenge instead of this is a threat, the physiology starts to change. So, you could raise your heart rate by running up a flight of steps, or you could raise your heart rate by having a panic attack. Now, both of those seem similar, but there's actually very important nuanced differences. Whereas when you raise your heart rate through that challenge response, because you ran up this flight of steps and you feel good that you did that, stroke volume of the heart changes, blood pressure changes. It actually changes your hormonal profile in a way that moves you toward action. It drives your focus into the present moment and moves you toward where you want to go. If you elevate the heart rate by focusing on something that gives you a panic attack, heart rate is still elevated, but stroke volume is decreased oxygen and nutrients flow throughout the system. Focus takes on this lateral kind of view where we begin to feel overwhelmed instead of focused. And our main action is biased toward running away from what we want to avoid. So if we can stay in that challenge response, we can move toward what we want. If we get stuck in the other one, we're running away from what we want to avoid. And it's a subtle difference at first, but the more you practice this and the more you consciously make that shift, the easier it gets. And eventually it can happen by default.